do some of that. And so we're here to help you with that. Condo Solutions have been on the air for over 20 years now, doing just this every single Monday, helping out with problems, questions, and giving some advice. My name is Mark Breckbill. I'm a licensed community association manager and also a CPA, and have been practicing in this area for about 25 years. And along with me is Peter Mullengarden. Peter's the co-host of the show. He's an attorney, and he also has been practicing in this area, but for even way longer than the 25 years I've been doing it. I think Peter's been somewhere probably close to 40 years now in this business, maybe more, and quite a bit of time. He is a specialist in this area, I guess is the terminology now, by the Florida Bar, which means that he's had enough experience, enough practical experience, plus educational and testing to say that he's an expert in the field, which he is. And he's been, again, with us on the show for 20 years, in the industry for much longer, helping you answer the questions. For those of you who are regular listeners, you know Peter's really good at giving you a straight answer in terms of what he thinks and what the law is and what his position is. So that a couple things that want to mention is that when you do association, and the reason for that is we don't want to call you hey you, and then second of all, sometimes when people are listening, they hear some facts and they think, oh, this doesn't apply to me. And then in effect, it really does. Maybe it's the same issue, almost the same issue. The other thing that we always warn about is we give you the best answer we can, but we call them radio answers, which what we mean by that is that we don't have your documents. So that answer can change pretty considerably if your documents have language that change it. Florida is what they call a default statute state in effect. What that means is that you can put things in your contracts and documents that are binding, and you have to act in that manner or follow those rules. If you leave it out, then the state law comes into effect, and so so you kind of default to the state statute. But if you put language in it, even if it's opposed, you're going to be dealing with that language. Now, sometimes there are a few things that the state will override, but very few. This is real property, and very few rights can be taken away by the legislature. So you'll find that that's kind of an interesting thing about about Florida and about how things work. So therefore, since we don't have your documents, we have to give you an answer based on your interpretation of the documents, which we understand can be involved and confusing, and or common practices, standard state law, rules and regulations, and things like that. But we just like to warn that if you're really going to take something to court and you need an answer for something like that, you need to call Peter, set up a time for him to meet with you, and he can look at your documents and then give you an answer that you need going forward. So that's all the ground rules. Not much to it, and pretty straightforward. But we've been here, and we're here for you, and we'll answer your questions. We got a couple calls on, but I've got I'll give you the number 220-9788. 220-WSTU. That's area code 772-220-9788. 772-220-WSTU. And you can feel free to call. Evan will get you in the queue, and we'll get you on the air. Just be a little patient, because we do tend to talk about your specific problem and want to answer your specific question, but we also may talk a little broader to try to capture some of the questions that are not exactly the same, but are really, really close. So that's the basis of it. Good morning, Peter. How are you?
I'm well, Mark. Good morning. Happy Monday.
Yeah. I just got back from the CIRA conference. We had our annual CIRA conference. You have the real property conference at some point nearby that, don't you? Is it already happened, or is it after?
They've already had it. Yeah, they had it in October.
Yeah, it's our conference was an in-person conference. We had about 100 and I think we had about 150 or 60 people, I think, that were there, and then we had about another 100 online. So we had a good turnout. It was a really good program, and kind of nice to get up to speed and hear what's going on. The problem with Zoom and all of the online stuff is you don't catch the conversations and the things that happen not only during the session but outside the session. The questions and answers. So it was a really good program. So I'm glad we got to do that. We're finally live, and then uh, we're going up. I'm going up to Tallahassee. I think it's in a couple weeks to meet with the division for our annual meeting there, and then we plan next year's conference. So those of you out there, if you've got questions that you have for the division or something, I might have an opportunity to ask that question. So let me know. You can either call in here and kind of give us a rundown of what your question is, or you can send me an email at mbreckbill@markbreckbill.com. That's MBRECHB as in boy, ILL at Mark with a K, MARKBRECHBILL.com. And I'll take your question with me, and we'll check it out and see if we can get an answer. So otherwise, looks like we got our first caller. Diana, go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you.
I think you've heard this story before, and I think I know the answer, but I need some practical help from you. We recently had our annual budget meeting, and not all the board recommendations got approved, and of course the board was disappointed. But the one of the board members, her husband happens to be an attorney, and he said to everyone who attended that only the board can decide on this issue, not an association attorney. He was talking about material changes. And I mean, that to me is an answer of convenience, because earlier something had gone their way and the answer was, well, you have to talk to the association attorney. So, I mean, you can't have, well, I don't think you can have it both ways. My question is, and what I need help with is, how do you educate the owners who attended that and heard that and rely on that information?
Okay. Well, the answer to the first question, if you want to call it an answer, is the attorney only, and I'm going to use that word, I guess, quotes a little bit, but the attorney only advises, right? So ultimately, the board does decide whether something is going to be an alteration or not. Doesn't mean the board is correct. Okay. But the association, the board very often will turn to the association council and ask for an opinion or ask for advice regarding whether a proposed thing that the board's thinking about doing is a material alteration or not. And the attorney, will give his or her opinion, and then the board will do, will act on it or not act on it. So it is, the board does decide, the attorney advises. So the attorney isn't the one, quote, making the decision, unquote. As far as speaking to the owners, I mean, there is no statutory or otherwise direct conduit, to, when things are going sideways, or certain owners are thinking the board isn't acting appropriately or whatever, if that's what you're saying. Obviously owners are free to make a request to the association to get an address list of all the owners. That's part of the official records. And then any owner can contact, the owners using that address list, write to them, and express their views. If I'm understanding you correctly, and they can, contact the owners and tell them what they think about what's happening or what's going on.
And Diana, truthfully, it isn't actually the board that decides. Ultimately, it's actually a court that potentially is going to decide.
That's
yes. And what I was getting at is that
what I was getting at is who makes the decision for the association. That might be a wrong decision, might be a right decision, but you're correct. If someone challenges it, it'll be an arbitrator or a court ultimately.
Right. No, and I agree with 100% with what you said, Peter. But I was just making the point that the attorney, their attorney might be right, in terms of the board ultimately has the potential final decision for the association, but that's subject to the challenge by the members
Right.
in court, and so therefore, as Peter says, they're there to give advice. The attorney is there to give advice, so that you don't have to go to court. But
if the board, but if the board acts contrary to their professional opinions, whether that's the attorney or an accountant or an engineer, they better be ready to defend themselves as to why they think that professional advice was wrong. I mean, now sometimes when you think it's wrong, you go out and get a second opinion, just like with doctors or anything else, and that's perfectly fine. But if the attorney or the accountant or the engineer is giving a pretty strong opinion, not just one, well, could be this way, could be that way, but is saying, this is, I think pretty definitively that it's X rather than Y, and they choose Y, then that board is going to find itself maybe having a problem because later on they cannot defend themselves that they're relying on experts or whatever because they ignored the expert. Unless they have reasonable reason to not rely on that expert because of whatever reason, maybe they think he or she has a substance abuse problem or something. I don't know. But they can rely on experts, but when they don't, then they have a problem. Are they really acting in good faith? And good faith is one of the things that boards are supposed to act on. Again, I've had boards get second opinions, third opinions, and that's perfectly fine. If they think,
Okay.
but to ignore the advice, again, when it's strong, again, if it's kind of like wishy-washy, can go either way, well, that's different. So anyway,
Well,
but Mark's right.
the
Ultimately,
property manager,
if challenged, it'll be a court or an arbitrator.
okay, that's the only way to go, huh? The property manager, who was present at the meeting, advised that they needed a 75% of the ownership vote, and that came from the attorney. So I mean, it's not like they didn't have an attorney's opinion before they started this. And again, I'm just worried about the.
All right, so they had an opinion from an attorney that whatever it is they were thinking about doing was a material alteration and needed the 75% vote.
Correct.
And they went the other way.
Well, they want to go the other way. The problem is that they left it as, okay, we'll have to present this in a different manner and give you more information so owners can vote on it again. But the attorney that spoke said that none of that mattered, that that was wrong, that material changes are decided by the board. So, and while I've heard everything you said, and there's a nuance in there, and I agree, it's the board's decision after listening to all of the professional advice that they get. But to say that out loud at a meeting, not everybody's going to understand that there's how that process exactly works, and that
well, and Diana, to tell you the truth, it is not the board's decision. If it is a material alteration, if it is deemed to be a material alteration, then most likely it is the responsibility of somebody other than the board. It's the members, potentially the members plus mortgage holders. I mean, at that point, depending upon what it is and how significant it is, it can require the approval of anybody that has a mortgage on the property.
Well, that's probably unlikely, but okay.
But possible, especially if it changes the financial.
No, it's probably unlikely. I mean, I don't think the mortgage holders will have much say in this because only if their documents say you need mortgagee approval for an alteration. At the end of the day, material alterations for condominiums require the approval that's in the declaration of condominium. And if a declaration of condominium is silent, then you need the approval of 75% of the voting interests of the membership. So what's going to happen here? And, if the attorney gives advice, yes, you need the approval of whatever percentage of membership is required in this particular condominium based on their documents, and then they don't get it, then like you said before, at that point, if they proceed to do the project or to do the thing without the approval, then any owner can challenge it. Okay. And that decision will be challenged. If no one ever challenges it, then the issue becomes moot because they quote get away with it unquote or whatever you want to say.
Right. Well,
I mean,
okay.
these
There's an effort
documents
to
don't.
challenge it. Again, I should have told you one more thing about this, and that is that we're talking about placement of cell towers on the roof. And I think I remember
we
that
talked
you
about.
said
Okay,
that is a material alteration,
that is
that there's
yes.
case law or something, some precedent that's been decided.
There's cases on it. That's a material alteration.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought. I'm sorry. I should have started with that. But actually, you've enlightened me again, as you always do, about other situations. But okay.
Yeah, so I'll assume in that case, I hate to use that word, I'll assume in that case the attorney recommended get the approval of the membership.
Well, I'm assuming that too. Otherwise, I don't think the property manager would have insisted that it needed that large percentage of ownership voting.
Because if that's what the manager said, then that means that's what the documents say, or the documents are silent, and documents typically aren't silent. So I'll have to make another assumption, but I'll have to make an assumption that these particular documents require 75% approval for material alterations.
Correct.
So if this association proceeds to sign a contract with a cell tower company, whether it's an easement or a lease, and we'll get into that again, but
easement. It needs to be an easement.
Any owner could then challenge it. I mean, if I'm the cell tower company, I even might want to see the approval before I enter into this, but I'm not the cell tower company.
Yeah. Well, they've already told us that it's absolutely going to be a lease. So,
but the lease doesn't really make a difference.
And we were told no.
Yeah, this is really the use of the property is being materially changed by the use of it. Now we can disagree whether that is a material alteration, but the way the cases have come down is, in my view, it is. So, hopefully they will seek and get the approval before they get too deep into the cell tower thing.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
And tell them to multiply the amount that they're getting in fees for the cell tower times 30%, and that's what it cost them to do a lease instead of an easement.
Oh.
Yep. So if they're getting, let's say they're being paid $500,000 over a period of time, it cost them $150,000 to do that as a lease instead of an easement. So they might want to rethink that philosophy. But anyway. So.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Well, thank you both. Again, you're very helpful. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Diane. So that's a good point and a good question. So we can talk a little more about that. We'll get our next call. John, go ahead.
Hey, good morning. Let me shut down the radio.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks. Happy Thanksgiving to you, Mark and Peter. I've called you for 16 years, so some of this might be redundant because I always ask the same questions. I'm getting older here. But
do we give the same answers? That's what's interesting.
We're old too, so we probably forgot the question.
That's right.
That's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping you guys forgot too. But I just came out of a condo, and now I'm in a homeowners association the past few years, and of course, 718 is not 720 as far as the statutes go. And we just lost our election material for last year. And of course, there is no government entity to go to. Basically, what the department tells me to do is sue. Is that true, Peter?
Well, the division only has limited jurisdiction when it comes to HOAs. They do election disputes, and recalls, and I think that's about it. They have limited jurisdiction when it comes to homeowner associations.
So if we can't find our election materials from last year, then there's really no recourse, I guess.
What do you mean your election materials? You mean all of the ballots and
the official records? You mean like the proxies and everything have disappeared?
The whole 9, yes, the whole 9 yards. The annual meeting, the proxies, the ballots, the ledger, the sign-in sheet, everything gone.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Those just disappeared, huh? Kind of like little magic trick. I like that. That's neat. We've not, Peter. I don't think in all of our 20 years we've ever discussed magic on the show, have we? So this is really kind of good. So they disappeared. That's interesting. Um, the so I guess at this point, uh, depending on what kind of terms you have on your board, if you got staggered terms,
just 1 year.
just 1 year. So I was going to say I'd start I'd start challenging members at that point. Show me who won. But anyway, yeah, I think that's one of the things that people don't, for some reason or another, nobody wants to keep any records today. And I understand that. Yes, it clutters up the closet, but it shouldn't. Nowadays, we have electronic filing. We have electronic record keeping. Not only can you store a ton of data, and it takes up a space that's about an inch wide, but you can also access it easier. And if you have a hurricane, nothing gets wet. If you can have off-site backup and all kinds of things. So I don't think there's as good of excuse anymore for destroying or for not keeping things. Now, in this case, it could be they thought that they had converted it to digital and didn't, and they went ahead and destroyed the paper. But even there, I still don't see why it has to be done within a year, of the election. I would at least wait until the next election. And
that wasn't the case here. What happened was the president decided to take all the documents from the management company. And I don't know why they said that we were going to get charged a large amount, which was not the case, because the management company is going to store anything up to 7 years free of charge. I mean, I shouldn't say free, nothing's free, but it's in the contract. Anything over 7 years, if we wanted to keep it, we probably should have transferred it. But when the transfer came, when they were moving everything over, apparently none of these boxes are labeled or anything, and nobody paid attention, and somehow it got lost in the move, so to say. But
basically, but John, but to answer your question, I mean, under Chapter 720, access to records is subject to their pre-suit mediation procedure, which is the procedure that applies to most disputes dealing with an HOA. Like I said before, not including elections and not including recalls. So the pre-suit mediation procedure, which is 720.311, which again handles most disputes in an HOA, is there's a statutory form of the letter sent to the association with a list of mediators. They have to choose one. Then you go to mediation. After mediation, if it doesn't resolve at mediation, then you can actually go to court. Here, not that I'm trying to pour cold water on this, I'm not sure what damages there are, and if they're missing, there'd be injunctive relief, which would mean they would have to produce them. But if they can't produce them, I'm not sure if this is a situation that doesn't really have a true remedy. I'm positive on that. But the process would be the pre-suit mediation, and then pursuing court after that if that was unsuccessful.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have mentioned that when I called the department, that they mentioned the pre-suit. And like you correctly pointed out, what is the result? I mean, the election is coming up in December.
If the election's coming up, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if the election's coming up and this had to do with last year's election, that's going to be deemed moot anyway. And so honestly, I hate to say this, not worth pursuing.
No, I know. I'm just making note because people listen to your show, and I've had in the last 20 years many dealings with the department. They had a lot more teeth back in the 80s than they do today. They're like you correctly pointed out, they're limited on certain items that they can do. Where years ago it was much more broad. They had a bigger staff, I guess. They had more money, whatever the reason was, but they were very helpful. Even if they couldn't help you, they gave you a lot more information than they do today.
Well, that's not so much true on the 720 side, though, John. Actually, the things that previously they really had no authority on the homeowners side, and they didn't want any, and they wouldn't give any advice because they weren't being paid for it. Frankly, that really is what it boiled down to. On the condo side, the reason that the division exists is that there's a fee. Every condominium association pays a fee per unit, which keeps the division running, and that's a good thing because then they do rules, and you don't have to go to court all the time and that kind of stuff. But on the HOA side, they don't pay that fee, so the division has never, in the past, really had any participation on the 720 side until, I don't know, what was it, Peter? Maybe 10 years ago or 8 years ago, or maybe where they
A little more.
where they stepped in and started providing guidance on elections. What you're probably referring to, John, and this did happen, it used to be that years and years ago on the 718 side with condos that that the state would actually step in and kind of handle other issues like maintenance issues and just all kinds of things that would come up, and they have pulled out of that on 718. They have pulled away from that, and now again have narrowed their function because they were getting they were getting tied up in a lot of disputes that really they couldn't they it would have taken them a long time and a lot of personnel to come up with a decision, which still potentially would have been challenged, and so they kind of pulled away from all of that. So you're right, you're not getting as much help, but that's the reason why. It's not because they don't want to, but it's because either A, they're not paid for it, and or B, it got to the division was getting bogged down in the minutia of some things that were happening at associations, and big things were getting missed, like board issues and fraud and voting violations and election violations and all that kind of stuff. So anyway.
Yes, you're correct, Mark. I'm sorry. I should have pointed out that I lived in condos longer in Florida than I've lived in HOA. So yes, 720 was never an issue in the 80s. I was referring to 718. Thank you for pointing that out.
No problem.
But which brings me to my next question. A community development district is elected. The supervisors of the board are elected publicly. They are on the same ballot that the presidents were on last year, if it's in your district.
Mm-hmm.
The trouble with that is I have found that there is no governing agency that has oversight over the supervisors, which basically means that they have to police themselves. And if you have board members and a chairman that don't want to lift up the carpet and look at that dirty stain underneath it, nothing is going to happen. Unless, of course, you go out, you get a lawyer, and you sue. And I was just amazed because I've never lived in a community development district, and I'm amazed that there is no recourse besides lawsuits. I thought with public officials there would be some department that would have oversight, especially if one of the supervisors broke the law, be it a civil law, not a criminal law. But I thought there would be some agency that could help. There is none.
Well, I think kind of you're right there, but a little bit. Okay, so there's actually two possibilities. One is that you could you can have a recall. So there, just like with any kind of elected office, there's provisions, I believe, in the statute for CDDs to be able to recall. It's an expensive process because of the type of vote and the election that takes place, but there is the ability to do that. And then the other thing that you can do is that because of their elected authority, they're a little bit more quasi-governmental and governmental than they are even HOA condo type things. So they have some fiduciary responsibility that that you could pursue in court, to pursue them from. So if they're self-dealing, if they don't do what they're supposed to do as an elected official, you probably have some remedies there, both legally and recall standpoint.
Well, yes. I mean, we're just, for the average layman, they're just trying to avoid courts. I mean,
Yeah.
it gets expensive. Like you say, recalls are expensive, lawyers are expensive. And I just wanted this one supervisor to be disciplined. And they didn't even want to address that. They just totally ignored what had happened. They were provided evidence and they just wanted to look the other way. And it's one thing for a board on an HOA or a POA or a COA to do that, but I just thought I was just flabbergasted in this day and age with all this layers of government and bureaucracy that there is not one agency that can address that for public officials.
Yeah, I'm surprised too. I'm wondering if it's at the state level, because I can't believe that. I mean, I can't believe that it's completely unregulated from that standpoint. Even even local community things where like the school board, for example. The state ultimately has the authority to remove a school board member if there's malfeasance or whatever. So I'm wondering if there's
Yeah,
some.
I've gone to the governor's office and they won't deal with it.
Well,
So
it's
like,
interesting. Did they don't want to deal with it, or won't deal with it, or they say they don't have any kind of authority
well,
because
of course, I'm not actually speaking to the governor or the immediate chief of staff or a staff member. I'm speaking to the bureaucratic chain. When you call the governor's office, you can call a complaint line.
yeah.
And I finally got through to a supervisor, and I explained to her that I don't want to waste any time, putting in a complaint if there's nothing you can do. And her answer basically was, "No, I'm sorry, sir. There's nothing we can do about that. The governor's not going to address that."
Yeah, that kind of sounds like he could but doesn't want to. So,
Well,
but yeah, that
which
sounds.
so we'll sidestep that one and go to number 3. Unless you have a caller, I don't want to filibuster here,
No,
but
go
it
ahead.
kind of relates to what we were just talking about. But if you have a caller, I can drop off.
No, we're good. Go ahead.
Okay. So the next thing is deed restricted communities. I have talked to you guys about this in the past. And when you have a new developer, I hate that term. I always say that. Not a new developer. Everything's been turned over to the POA. There is no declarant. There is no developer. There's just lots that builders have purchased. So now a big company they've already purchased the lots. They want to build on those lots. So they go to P&Z, they show their plans, and then P&Z does a little architectural review, meaning whatever's in the city code, and then they push it over to the building department. The building department says, signs off on everything, issues permits to build. All that seems to go around the fact that in a deed restricted community, they have their own architectural review committees. And for some reason, I've discovered that the city can just issue these building permits and the builder doesn't even have to go in front of the modification committee. And and when I asked the city attorney about this, they go, well, we're not going to get involved in private matters. And I pointed out to him, it's not just a private matter. We're kind of a special situation here. We're a CDD POA, and we are in the PUD as far as architectural enforcement and architectural control. And it specifically mentions that when the developer leaves, it gets turned over to the POA. But same answer. The attorney says, well, we're not going to enforce that. It's not as if they can't, because it is in the PUD. It's just that they choose not to. And this is just not about my community, but I can't imagine all the other communities that have the same situation where they have in their documents architecture review. They want the community to look a certain way. They want the houses to look a certain way, but one neighborhood might look different than the other because the city kind of overrides and pushes it through. Have you run across this before?
And maybe I'm missing something, I don't know. But unless this builder is somehow exempt from the architectural control provisions pursuant to the terms of the HOA or POA's governing documents, then notwithstanding that the city is not doing anything, I mean, the lawyer is right in the sense that there is a cause of action or a private cause of action by that association to enforce its own documents, its own architectural control provisions, notwithstanding that they got a building permit, and notwithstanding that the city took a pass on the architectural issue and just said, we're only looking at these factors, but not these aesthetic factors. We're only looking at setback or this and that. They're not looking at, the design or the color or whatever. They're just looking at a certain aspect of it. Again, unless there's some exemption, that association, and maybe because it's pre-turnover and still controlled by a developer entity, but that association, there's nothing stopping it from enforcing the restrictions that, even though the city, I don't know what this PUD document says, but long story short, why wouldn't the association, if they object to what they're putting in from an architectural standpoint, from a design standpoint, why wouldn't they take action against this builder again, unless there was some exemption or something in the documents that they didn't have to get the approval?
Well, to be fair to the builder went, before they purchased the lots, did email the president, and the president kind of said that they had the authority to approve plans. Now, these plans are never submitted to the board. They were never, the site plans, the elevations, all the detailed stuff was never submitted to the board to be approved. So basically what the president did was circumvent the modification committee. That's when I looked at the PUD. I saw in the PUD where they have architectural controls, where it specifically says that before they can get building permits, they do have to get the the POA Architectural Review Committee to approve them. Now, that's where the attorney said, well, no, I read it differently. And I says, well, excuse me, sir, but it is a city ordinance and is not a municipal ordinance, a law. I mean, you can't have it both ways. If it's in the PUD and it's voted in by ordinance and it's signed by a mayor, and at the time, 20 years ago, it was signed by the city attorney, why wouldn't you be enforcing this provision that's in the PUD? Now, if it wasn't in the PUD, I wouldn't even be going to the city because it wouldn't be a public issue if it wasn't in the PUD. But it is in the PUD.
Okay, then at some point in this circumstance, it sounds like sort of like the other caller about the cell tower antenna, where things don't enforce themselves if no one's willing to do the right thing, so to speak. Not that I'm quoting any Spike Lee movies, but here again, if the city attorney is not properly reading, the PUD requirements, the president, quite frankly, he or she does not have the authority to unilaterally approve something when that's supposed to go through the Architectural Control Committee or the Modification Committee, whatever name it goes by. But at the end, if no one, and here no one would be literally owners, if no one steps up and literally files something, says, hey, wait a minute, city attorney, you're not doing the right thing. Mr. President or Ms. President, you're not doing the right thing. And again, the court doesn't know what's going on because, no one's bringing anything to their attention. So what I'm saying is, if no one is thrown, to use a sports analogy, because Mark loves that, if no one's throwing a flag on this situation, it just goes through. And you and other owners who don't like it can be upset and jump up and down. But again, someone, would then literally need to, I hate to throw the lawyer card in there, go out, hire an attorney and start writing letters, real letters, say, hey, wait a second, fellas, this ordinance, this PUD thing says this, these documents say this is what happened. This ain't right.
Right.
And, we're going to file suits for injunctions and blah, 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 blah. Because you see cases like this, not that infrequently, where, it took a group of owners or a owner to step up and say, you know what, no one's doing the right thing here. That unfortunately is expensive, like you mentioned, but kind of like with your CDD problem, if there's no agency that's going to step in or not willing to step in, that's going to end up being the remedy, that someone has to step up and say, you guys aren't doing the right thing. The documents aren't being enforced. This PUD thing's not being enforced. people are reading this wrong. And that, I don't see any way out other than something like that happening. Otherwise, it'll just go through and it'll just
Well-
happen, notwithstanding that it might not have been correct.
Well, that's exactly what's going to happen, because these owners that live in this particular community are going to get a lawyer. It might be you, Peter. But I think you're still south of here, right?
I'm in Palm Beach Gardens. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just teasing you, but I don't know. Maybe
All right.
I'll, if they ask me, I'll say, hey, I know a good guy. He's on the radio. But in any event, it's unfortunate. It really is unfortunate that the governmental agencies don't have a backstop to deed restricted communities, because all they have to do in the PZ is they have a compliance review, and I met with them. I says, don't you have a checklist? And they don't even have a checklist. I'm like, well, what are you reviewing? So I was able to get a council person involved, and we all sat down, and they're going to try to come up with a checklist. And all we're asking on that checklist is, have you applied to the association's architectural review committee, and have you gotten an answer, or have you gotten approval? That, now, is the city going to enforce that? I don't know. They're probably not, but at least if it's on there, it makes whoever the builder is aware of a process. Now, like I said, this builder wanted to do the right thing. And the president, who happens to be the same person I was talking about earlier on the CDD, they are also a supervisor in the same community. So it all comes back to this one person who thinks that they can unilaterally, as a CEO of a company, just make decisions on the top of their head. And unfortunately, when you get power crazed people like that, the community suffers. But if the city was to provide some backstops, I'm not asking them to get involved in private matters, but there are procedures. I worked in government for 3 decades.
No, you're right. Oftentimes these site plan approval or the PUD approvals, it'll be in their checklist. Approval from the ACC or approval from whatever committee, and it'll be right there. You're exactly right. I haven't read this one, but typically it is part of the building permit approval process that the association has approved, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hey,
it's just unfortunate, though, that the city can't just put in that, in a checklist. Apparently, they don't even have a checklist. I don't know if they had one years ago and it faded away. But if they would just do a couple of boxes just for homeowners associations to help us out, that would be great.
Hey, John, I hate to cut you off. I got a caller in here waiting, so
Okay.
let me
Okay,
go.
thanks, guys.
Thanks, John.
Thank you,
Appreciate
John.
it.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Hey, Edna, thanks for patiently waiting. Appreciate it. Go ahead.
Okay, this will be short. Can a board take out a large, and when I say large, it's $2.5 million loan without a membership vote?
The answer to that is typically yes. It depends upon the documents. Some documents, like one I read last week or week before, required owner approval. Some do. Most, quite frankly, do not. So typically they can do it without owner approval. It depends upon what the documents say. It also obviously depends upon what the loan is being used for, the underlying purpose of the money. But you really have to look at the association's governing documents. And 99 times out of 100, that type of loan, the bank is going to be looking for an opinion of borrower's counsel, i.e. the attorney for the association, to opine whether or not, the board had approval.
Okay.
And that process, I think as Peter said, is pretty straightforward, and it usually is the way that it goes. There can be provisions in your documents that that do restrict that or have certain authority that's required. But in general, a lot of people don't realize it, but in general, many associations have the ability to to do that, to borrow on their own. The boards have the ability to go out and borrow. And, I like
I mean, they still have to go through board meetings and things like that, but typically you don't need owner approval, but sometimes you do.
yeah, and
Okay,
it's
I don't think our documents speak to it.
yeah. So if that's the case, again, like I was talking about earlier, it's kind of like a default, the default statute, and generally they would have that authority because there's no
Well, general corporate power
right.
gives them, under chapter 617, and even chapter 718 has language in there that I read as allowing associations to borrow. So I don't know what kind of association this is, HOA condo. But this is obviously something that the board should be, I say should be looking to their counsel for guidance and advice.
Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of times I think, like I said before, it's if you do have the ability to do this, it's good to get this kind of thing in place ahead of time so that it can go through the discussion process, it can go through the approval process, and so that it can be kind of set up when you don't need it, because sometimes it takes longer than people anticipate to get all this stuff approved. So it's a good idea to kind of go through that process and kind of be proactive on it, be prepared.
Okay. Well, thank you. Have a happy Thanksgiving. I appreciate y'all.
You too, Edna.
We
Thanks
appreciate
for calling.
you. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, it's that time of the year. It's the Thanksgiving time of the year. So we're thankful for all of the things that we have, and we're thankful for all of you out there joining us on a Monday morning to go over things. And we appreciate the calls and ask that you continue to tell your friends about us, and hopefully join us every Monday. We'll be here to try to answer those questions. And again, I want to emphasize again how much we appreciate you as listeners calling in and asking questions and generating some topics for discussion that you want to hear and that others I know too want to hear. So thank you again for all that call on a regular basis, and thank you all for joining us here on Condo Solutions. And have a happy Thanksgiving, a safe Thanksgiving, and enjoy your family and your community. We'll be back again next Monday from 9 to 10 o'clock right here on WSQ Digital 1450. We're Martin County's Heritage Station.